Well, joining us live here in the World News Studio is the soil scientist John DiIulio, director of the Environmental Education Media Project, who followed that project from the very start. That looked astonishing. It looked almost like some sort of terraforming device, the way that you mixed those shots. But in real terms, what have you achieved?
Well, we've achieved documentation of a project in China. So in China, the government and the people have basically taken a place which was historically degraded over very long periods of time and analyzed why that degradation was taking place. And they found that it was the loss of biodiversity, loss of biomass, loss of accumulated organic matter that was disrupting infiltration, retention of rainfall, which also changes photosynthesis and nutrient.
Okay, what are the composite bits of this jigsaw that have to be kept in place for this kind of land to then come through the system?
Well, probably the most startling thing is that they transitioned all the people away from subsistence agriculture. So if you're going to leave people in poverty, it's going to be very difficult to restore these areas. So it's simultaneously a transition for the people sociologically and economically.
Okay, if the political dynamic is there, because that's in effect what we're saying here, if the political dynamic is in place, is the process easy?
Well, I wouldn't say it's easy. I mean, it's in fact extremely complex because you have a number of systems which are working together. But you have a vicious cycle which, if you're disrupting long-term evolutionary trends, then you're kind of trapped in this destructive, vicious cycle. But if you understand that infiltration, retention of rainfall, accumulation of organic matter, the role of biomass and the role of biodiversity, then you can actually get a virtuous circle which will restore this.
Okay, if we have now got an understanding of how to break that cycle, what's to stop us doing this at some point further down the road for all the different bits of the planet that we're told increasingly are being affected by global warming? Or to ask the question another way, why can't we just carry on abusing the planet and then at some point say, oh well, we can do what they've done in China?
Well, I think you come to collapse. So, I mean, one of the early things that you've seen is that civilizations actually collapsed because their ecosystems failed. And what we're seeing here is that we need to understand and come in line with the ecosystem function. So if we understand what the ecosystem function is and we work together with nature, we can have a much better result than if we break it. So, you know, the earlier we intervene and restore these areas, the implication that I see is that we should restore every bit of degraded land now.
What does this mean for other countries, other continents?
Well, I mean, we're interested in addressing human impact on climate change. So we want to sequester carbon. So carbon was originally removed from the atmosphere by photosynthesis. So here we have huge areas of the planet which have been degraded, and we can do photosynthesis there if we restore their functionality.
So does that mean that this process is being worked through or has been worked through in other locations?
We've seen in Ethiopia, we've seen in Rwanda, actually everywhere where we've tried and gone to look and see, would this work? It has worked. So if you understand why these places are becoming less and less fertile, less and less moist, and you intervene to change that, then actually every place where we've gone to look, it has worked. But we need further investigation.
So what are the implications of what we're cataloguing here now, looking forward to the Climate Change Summit in Copenhagen?
Well, I think we've talked about energy efficiency, we've talked about conserving the last remaining ecosystems, but there's a really big thing that we need to do, which we need to look at the areas of the planet that have already been degraded by human beings and see whether we could restore that, because that's the biggest upside for carbon sequestration. You have a factor of 1 in the biomass, but in the soil organic matter you have even higher potential for carbon sequestration. So you have probably a factor of between 4 and 5 in these areas, and you have 100% upside. So it's not just a small incremental increase that we could get. And the idea that we could build a machine that would be better at sequestering carbon than a biochemical photoreactive process that evolved over hundreds of millions of years is rather laughable.
Thank you very much for joining us here on the BBC.